Okay, all right, let's get started. My name is Peggy Arif. I'm with Coldwell Banker in the greater Sacramento area. And I thought with the shelter in place that it was a good time to introduce you to my good friend, Brandy Lidbeck. Brandy is a therapist. She is an author. She has also experienced the loss of 2 loved ones to suicide. She's a suicide loss survivor, and she has built really her passion and her career around mental health. And I am so excited to see your face, but also to share you and your experience. So when I think about people that have had hard situations in their life and have turned it around to impact hundreds and thousands of lives, that you're one of the first people that come to mind. You want to tell people a little bit about your background and how you became passionate about this topic?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peggy. I did lose my mom when I was a child to suicide. And it was one of those things that, especially back then in the 1991, you didn't talk about it. There was no support groups, no internet to find support on, nowhere to go. And so kind of just wandered around for several years. There was a shame attached to therapy, and there was just kind of wandering around of feeling alone and isolakedness. And through circumstances throughout my life, ended up getting some help, a lot of help. I did find my mom. So there's a lot of trauma attached to that. And then when I was 27, my cousin came home from Iraq as from an army, from serving over there, and he also took his life. And so suicide has devastated our family. And through circumstances, ended up getting involved in this work. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and really just felt like just the desire to work with those who've lost someone to suicide. And so that is what I do full time. I work with families who have lost someone. And then out of that came the book and the website, and it's kind of just been, I guess, a calling.
And I mean, you've been a speaker in a big way too, traveled to speak on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, what do you see as one of the biggest challenges facing people that are in dealing with shelter in place right now?
Yeah, so we're seeing just a lot of increased anxiety, financial hardship, obviously, isolation, the perceived belief that there's limited resources as far as help and support. And we'll kind of probably talk about that a little bit tonight. But we're seeing, an increase in alcohol sales, an increase in domestic violence. And obviously the media kind of helps add to that anxiety a lot. And so we're just seeing people out of their norms and really not knowing what the future holds and how long this is going to be. And so when those kind of things all kind of come together, we have just a lot of stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's not something that we, like Americans, have gone through this before, unless you were around during the Spanish flu, right? So you'd be over 100 years old. So it's not like an experience that we thought we would be in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And B, it takes time to kind of figure out your own way through this, and what your new normal is.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So as far as, what you can do to take care of yourself when you're in this situation, I mean, what are you advising your clients right now?
Yeah, I think the main thing is just to stick to old routines as much as possible. So keep to your schedules. If you're used to, getting up and working out at a certain time, keep it. If you're used to showering each morning and then sitting down to read alone for a bit, do it. Keep up with the old patterns and routines as much as possible. When everything else feels out of control, like we just said, the best thing to do to combat that is to stick with your patterns and stick with the things that you are in control of. And then if it's also a good time to make routines. So Zoom with your friends, or have, online meetups, or do the things that you've been putting off. Like you want to do a project whenever you have more time. Well, now's the time, get those things done. But stick to a pattern, stick to a routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, especially since people are like, they have kids, they're homeschooling, they're working from home and maybe not used to, how to do that effectively. You know, getting a routine, what your work hours are going to be every day. I've worked from home for 14 years. And so, I have hours that I work from home. When I come into the office in my house, I'm dressed and all of that stuff. And so that's a hard learning curve when you're just thrown into working at home, when you've got the distraction of kids. So, on those, all we are basically is foundationally a bundle of habits. And what are some key habits and tools that we can do to establish new habits?
Yeah, I think anything that involves self-care. So that's, going for long walks. I've done a few walks with friends that are 6 feet apart, right? And we'll go around the track near a high school near our homes. Doing exercise, checking in with friends, doing all the things that are life-giving to you. That might mean turning off the TV when the media comes on and painting doomsday. And if that causes anxiety, then that's a good thing to turn off, right? They make money by selling, doom so that people tune in to watch more. So just doing anything that involves self-care.
What are you doing as far as putting boundaries around media? Because, there's kind of a balance about being informed, but I think if you track your use on your cell phones and, people have been watching 2-hour press conferences, checking all the news articles online, probably staying up too late doing that, and then starting the day, first thing looking at it and, kind of putting some brackets on it. How do you work that in your own life?
I think sticking to resources that are not doomsday, but just giving the real truth. So like CDC or websites like that, like my local one as well for my county, so that you have the numbers and you have the facts. But if you read every single article that pops up on your news feed or, your homepage or whatever, then you would be reading all day. And it's all about stories of people who were dying and people who were healthy otherwise. And, it just just adds to it. So we do minimal. We just read just to keep informed and follow, guidelines and regulations and call it good.
Yeah, up here in Placer County, we have like 130 confirmed cases of COVID. We're a big county. We go all the way up to Lake Tahoe. And so, keeping those numbers in perspective, I've had moments where I've had to go into my office for work and I have my mask and I have my gloves and then I'm sanitizing and I get back to my car and I'm stripping the gloves off and I'm wiping everything down and thinking, did I touch the gloves with the door and did I wipe this down? And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like living in a different world, and causing more strife. But in reality, what are the chances that if the numbers are correct, that someone has touched the doorknob to my office, right? There's 100 people in a county, our own town has over 40,000 people. So just as a perspective point, it gets hard.
Yeah, I think kind of what we were talking about earlier, Peggy, is like anxiety breeds anxiety, right? And so when we become anxious with things, oh my goodness, I'm getting anxious. I'm so nervous. What if that, and we just start, and that just snowballs into more and more anxiety. And I just don't think it's helpful, right? And so if you could just say, okay, what are the chances that someone came before me with COVID and touched this door hand? We just make informed, good choices of how to take care of yourself and stay indoors and.
Yeah. When I saw in the news about in Stockton, they had a couple of teenagers in that area that took their lives during this time. And I know you have a lot of good statistics on how the media portrays suicide and the effects of just even reporting on it. But it does kind of wake you up as a parent, like, oh gosh, what should I be doing checking in on my kids during this time period? And you're a mom with 3 kids, so you.
Yeah. So I think keeping the lines open of communication, right? One thing that parents get really scared about, and I hear this all the time. I do, a lot of prevention trainings, and the one thing that I hear over and over again is that people are really scared to ask someone, one, how they're doing because they're afraid of the answer, but two, they're really afraid to ask if they have some concerns about, are you thinking about suicide? Because their thought is, if I ask it, then I'm going to give them the idea. They might not have been thinking about it, but all of a sudden I'm going to give them the idea by mentioning it. And the example that I always give is back in the day when we started teaching kids about sex education, parents and teachers were really scared that if we started talking about sex education in school, then kids were going to go out and have sex, right? The reality is that they were already having sex. And so instead we were going to say, if you're going to have sex, then let's talk about STDs, and let's talk about safe sex, and let's talk about abstinence, and let's talk about all those things so that you're educated. If you're going to make this decision to go have sex, that you're educated of all that you need to know. Same thing with suicide. If you are thinking about suicide, I'm not going to plant that idea in your mind, but I'm going to say, if you're contemplating this, if you're serious about this, then let's get you the resources available. Let's educate you on alternatives of what you can do instead of suicide. So it's really important to ask the question, and people are really uncomfortable to ask it, but you just got to ask it. And you can point out like, hey, I'm concerned about you. Obviously we're in the midst of COVID, so everything looks a little different, but calling out those behaviors or words that they've talked about that are different or troubling, and that could kind of just open up the conversation. But keeping a dialogue with kids right now is really important.
And I mean, kids, when you're younger, you're going through like a lot of firsts. Your world is so much smaller than as you get to be an adult. So a kid that is now not going to play baseball, or, a first breakup from a boyfriend, it feels so much more intense than, now I'm 42 years old. I'm not thinking about, the guy I dated at 14 who, broke up with me, right? And touching base with kids, I mean, especially dealing with everyone's kind of lost in the situation, even if you didn't lose anyone to COVID, right? You've lost maybe income, time, hobbies, things that you were planning.
I think it's really important for both our kids and ourselves as adults, is to allow yourself to mourn what is lost. So you might not lose anybody during this time, to COVID or to another loss, but you are missing out on things that we've saved for. Maybe we're going to take that trip. Maybe it's an anniversary trip that you were going to take, or maybe it was an experience that you were planning, or maybe, like tomorrow, I was supposed to fly out tomorrow morning for a big conference, and now I'm not doing that. Our kids are missing their baseball. Like you said, my kid was preparing all year for this big award, and he was right on track to receive it, and now school ended. So all that work, and he's not gonna probably get that. I think allowing yourself to mourn and grieve what was lost, because there is a lot lost for everyone. And when our kids or when other friends articulate those losses, instead of discounting it or trying to fix it, which we can't do anyway, is to just validate it and empathize, right? So if someone says to me like, oh, I missed baseball, I really want to play baseball, instead of saying, oh, it's fine, there'll be baseball next year, right? That's discounting it. And nobody wants to share and be open when people are going to try to fix it or discount it. So instead, just, yeah, I'm so sorry. What is it that you're going to miss the most? Like, oh, I miss my coach. Oh, I miss all my friends. Or I've been working on my pitching all year, and I was ready to, show it off. Okay, yeah, I'm really sorry. And just empathizing, and that leads to more conversation and opening up. And 9 times out of 10, at that end of the conversation, that person will come around and say, well, at least there's next year, right? They'll get to that place on their own. But if you shut it down in the beginning and just say, oh, you're fine, or that breakup means nothing, that's not even the person you were going to marry, or that trip will be, all those things that we do because we're uncomfortable with other people's discomfort. We try to fix it and take away their pain, but they just need to listen, right? So I always say that I'm a pretty smart person. I have a master's degree. And when I share something with someone and they try to fix it or take it away, that's the biggest thing for me to stop all conversation. It just shuts me down. I don't need you to fix things. I'm perfectly capable of doing that. I just want you to listen and just hear me and validate like that this is hard.
Well, that's job security for you, right? Because people don't people don't want to do it.
Right.
And
That's right.
like
Keep fixing it. Keep.
yeah, and I have had like a positive like mindset bent. And so, when people say stuff, I'm like, yeah, but I mean, on the positive side, I think there's going to be some really good that comes out of it. And it's totally, shutting the other person down, discounting how they feel about something, but it's my like uncomfortableness with just negative thought, right? Like, I'm sure there's a plan for this.
Here's like 3 words that I always tell people not to use in communication with their friends or loved ones, right? Should, you should do this, you should do that. Don't give advice if it's unsolicited, right? So should, you should take that out of your vocabulary. Need, you need to do this, you need to go there, you need to save, you need to blah, blah, blah. Same thing, unsolicited advice. And but, you just said it. Yeah, but next year. Yeah, but next.
Yeah.
That just discounts it, right? So if you take those 3 words out of your vocabulary and don't find synonyms that mean the same thing, then you're opening up communication. And like you just said, you get so uncomfortable with people's discomfort that you try to like Pollyanna it. But that's never ever have I gone to someone, and I say, this was really hard. And they say, oh, it'll be better next year. And I'm like, oh, you're right. That solved it. Thank you. Right. Never, ever happened. And we always want to give advice to other people, but how much do we actually like receiving advice? Never, right? Unless we're asking for it. So just keep that in mind with your communication.
Yeah, that's good. If you are in the Zoom meeting, there is a chat function that you can click on the right-hand side of your screen, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can type in a message and we will ask your questions for Brandy. You know that my brother died of alcoholism, so it's kind of a more of an awareness than I think most people who haven't experienced that sort of losses. But when I'm seeing on, social media, people, parents that are like homeschooling their kids and they get like a giant like bottle of wine and they're like, oh, and it makes me nervous for what sort of coping habits that people are going to develop during this time or fall into that are going to be hard when you get out.
Yeah, so usually we turn to our vices when we feel things are out of control, right? Like I have no control over when I'm going to go back to work or when I'm allowed to leave my house or if I just need to go pick up toilet paper. Like when is this ever going to stop? So when things feel out of our control, we turn to things that we can numb it because, so that's food, that's alcohol, that's all those things that just like, okay, what can I do to control some sort of aspect of my life? And when things are uncomfortable, we just numb. So that's a lot of times, like everyone's talking about like what shows you binging on, that they use the word binge, right? And so that's just like, I have a ton of time that I just want to waste by looking in front of the TV, and that's just numbing out. And so just being really aware of, it is funny, to see those like memes once in a while that says like, I'm a homeschool teacher now and there's a jug of wine or something. But it's all funny until it's not really funny because that becomes your norm, right? So I would say be really aware of your consumption. Be aware of like if maybe before you used to have a glass of wine a couple times a week and now it's every day, or if it used to be like, oh, I don't have anything except for socially. Well, now you're doing it in the middle of the day by yourself, or you need it to get up, or people joke about gaining the COVID-19 pounds. And there's reality to that because it's numbing, right? It's uncomfortable and you're home and you're bored. And so I always think of HALT, which is HALT, right? So you use like alcohol, food, drugs, whatever, when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And so just keep those in mind. Like am I drinking? Am I eating because I'm any one of those things? Just kind of keeping in mind your consumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. One of the hardest things that I think has come out of this pandemic for our friends is, people are still having like hard things happen in their life. And then they have this layering of shelter in place and pandemic. And I've had 4 friends that have lost their parents just in the last 2.5 weeks. My best friend's mother-in-law. And I just feel thankfully all of them were able to get them home from the hospital to see them instead of saying goodbye over the phone in a hospital room or an iPad. But it's, it's just this sad part that sad things happen in life, and then you're in this situation.
I cannot tell you how many people I've spoken with over the last month who have lost someone, and they can't have a funeral, right? Or the one person told me about having a funeral, but there was a guard outside making sure that no more than 10 people entered. And just the way that complicates our grief, right? We need funerals. We need those things to put closure to a loss. And the closure doesn't mean, okay, I'm over, I'm done with that grieving, and now I can move on with my life. But that is necessary for that closure. So this is going to be the reality for a lot of folks who, my dad just told me that he went to a funeral the other day, and he got there in the parking lot, there was 3 people, and they said the funeral had to be canceled because there's too many people. So he didn't get to say goodbye to his long-term friend. And so that's a reality. And so I've been urging clients and, people that I've talked to just do what you can as an immediate family, and then, plan something for when all this ends and have a real celebration of life or memorial or whatever you're going to do. But you got to do those things. And grief doesn't understand like, oh, I didn't get that chapter because of COVID, but I'll be fine, right? You still got to do what you need to do for closure.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just because we're doing shelter in place, doesn't mean that there's not resources out there for grief counseling and alcoholism. And you're still meeting your clients on Zoom, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we, almost every therapist I've talked to in the last month, they're all seeing clients over Zoom like this, or on the telephone. Some are still seeing them in person. So I think that we have this perception of everything is closed down, but there are so many resources that are still available. All 12-step groups have gone to online meetings, and they do Zoom and they do phone sessions because the importance of still gathering, right? So a lot of people were concerned about my sobriety and all these things. Well, those are still in place. So there's NAMI, which is a fantastic resource that stands for National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. They're online, and they're doing all their support groups, both for the person who struggles with mental illness and then also for the family members who are trying to support them. You could call the hotline, like suicide prevention hotline, but you could also call like warm lines, and warm lines are county by county usually. And they are people who could, when you're not in crisis, but you still need some support or some help, or you need some local resources in your community, all those places are still available and can help you. So it looks different right now for sure, but they're not absent.
Yeah. We kind of talked about suicide and asking people direct questions. I don't know if this is nationwide, but our oldest one, Lily, she goes to a junior high school combo, and they have speakers on suicide, and they call it suicide awareness, not suicide prevention, because that makes kids feel like they could prevent other people or that they would have a part in it. But, they were talking about the difference of, somebody who says, oh, I just want to kill myself, to, somebody who has a plan.
Yeah. So, if we talk about the signs of suicide and what to look for, right? So people who talk about it, right? People who talk about like being a burden to others, or people would be better off without them, right? Those are things that people verbally say. But like behavioral things would be giving away their prized possessions. That's actually really, really common for people to, like kids to give away their Xboxes or their gaming consoles, elderly to give away like, some of their prized possessions or heirlooms or classic cars, or we see a lot of people give away their pets, make sure that they have a good home to go to. So when you start seeing some of these trends of like, why are you giving away that, that's your favorite fill in the blank, and they give, oh, I'm not really using it anymore. So giving away prized possessions, putting their personal affairs in order. That's like getting your will in place or taking care of your bank accounts. Sudden increase in drug or alcohol use, acquiring a gun, So those are kind of the things that we see a lot. And people, there's a stat like 90% of people have some sort of sign the week leading up to their suicide. And a lot of times people will say they have no signs. There was nothing that anybody knew. We were so shocked. And my answer is, do you know what the signs of suicide are? Because if you don't, then how do you know they gave no signs like leading up to it, right? So there's different things like situations that could put a person higher at risk. So that is being fired, right? Or being expelled from school, a loss of major relationships, sudden diagnosis, or like a diagnosis of like a terminal or serious illness, which is why our elderly population has such a high suicide rate as well. So there's just obviously financial security, losing that. There's a lot of signs to be aware of, and you can go to so many websites and just look up signs of suicide just to be aware of them and be familiar with them.
Have the, cases of suicide increased over the years?
Oh, over the years, for sure, it continues to increase. So the CDC puts out the numbers every single year, but they're a year behind. So the CDC just released the numbers for 2018, and those are the highest numbers. It was just about 48,000 people in the US alone. So what that averages out to about one every like 11 minutes. And worldwide, it's about one every 40 seconds. So it continues to increase, and it's alarming. And so the CDC called it an epidemic. It's the highest number since the Great Depression. So it is definitely on the rise. And so we want to be able to reach out and take care of folks and make sure that, we're checking on folks and that we know the signs.
So, and those statistics are outside of this pandemic, but what do you think's changed in society that's led to a higher case of suicide?
Oh, man. I think there's a lot of things, Peggy. I think that, I think there's so many answers to that, because what people really want is like a cause effect, right? It's going back to that control. So people want A plus B equals suicide. And if I could just avoid B, then suicide doesn't happen. But suicide is so many different components. There could be mental illness, there could be impulsivity, there could be addiction, there could be, there's so many things that are kind of involved in a suicide, and it's never just one thing. So we like to say, oh, he or she took their life because of a breakup, or he or she took their life because they were bullied. Well, how many times have we been broken up in our own lives, right? So bullying, breakup doesn't equal suicide. Bullying doesn't equal suicide, but there's just a lot of factors that go into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For those people that have had, I don't know that there are many families that haven't had someone in their family commit suicide. For those people that are left behind, I know that's a huge passion for you. What would you tell those people to do?
Yeah, to for sure reach out, because it feels very isolating and lonely to go through this alone. Suicide's a very unique type of loss, and there's a lot of guilt and shame, and a lot of times a lot of trauma involved. And the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, I should have prevented it, I should have known, I should have done it, all those things. And so a lot of times survivors will talk about saying the same thing over and over again. Like, I feel like I've said this 1,000 times and people still don't understand. They still say, get over it. They still, and so if you could find a support group, if you can find someone that you can share that with, where they could say, me too, right? So that's why the Me Too movement was so powerful, because you have all these people for the first time coming and saying what they were going through and what they had experienced, and it gains strength in numbers. And so then it gives courage to the next person to speak up, like, I experienced that too. So Brene Brown always says, the two most powerful words when we're in struggle are me too. And so just to get that Me Too factor and find other survivors, there's a million support groups, both in person and online, that you could find that would be helpful.
What was the biggest help for you? Was it one-on-one counseling?
I think the very, very first thing that was helpful was finding another survivor. It took 13 years to find another one, but I found one, and she was kind of saying the same things that I already thought in my head. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that thinks this way. So that was really helpful. And then doing my own therapy and getting to doing a lot of work with trauma and kind of just working through that.
Yeah. So what do people think about themselves being a survivor of that, or a child that how does that frame how you view your own worth or?
Yeah. So 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, parents feel like they failed their kids if a kid took their own life, no matter how old the kid was, if it 10 or 60. Parents, I mean, that's our job, is to protect our children. So parents feel a lot of guilt, a lot of, I could have prevented it, I should have been a better parent. Why didn't they come to me? Kids a lot of time feel the opposite. They feel, how come I wasn't valuable enough for my parent to stay around? What did I do that didn't make them, why didn't they love me? Why didn't they stick around? So you kind of see the same continuum, but very different ends of that. Siblings and spouses feel like, how come I wasn't enough for you to talk to me? There's just so many different dynamics, and yet they're all the same, kind of revolving around what it says about me and how I didn't measure up.
For someone who's, contemplated suicide, I mean, what would you tell somebody as someone who has dealt with that sort of loss?
Yeah. To just reach out. A lot of times there's this hopeless feeling that that things will never get any better. Life circumstances will never change or improve. And so really I kind of look at it like you're looking at it in tunnel vision, right? And so when we're stuck in this place and we can't see, we can't see the other end, it's really helpful to have someone else to kind of help broaden the, it's not A or B. There's like so much more that you're kind of like can't see with your tunnel vision. So reach out, ask for help, be willing to, because you matter, be willing to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And I think just kind of helping with that hopelessness and worth.
Yeah. You guys can ask questions on Facebook or in the Zoom, for sure. We were talking earlier, and I probably like 6 months ago, I started thinking a lot about how like superficial our conversations and our busyness with people. Like you see someone, hey, we should get coffee or whatever, and actually have a full conversation. Besides like weather and how busy you are and Tiger King, if he was around 6 months ago. But, and it just became like artificial, exhausting. And so in December, I wrote a goal that I was going to meet one-on-one with 100 people and just calendar it in. And so at the beginning of the year, I started really diving in. And I know we've been friends for a long time, and you've really helped me like really ask authentic questions like, how are you really doing? Because you probably see it as much as I do. You think everything's fine with someone, and then all of a sudden you find out they're getting a divorce, or they're sick, or some life circumstance. So what advice would you have for people about, real conversations?
Yeah, have them. Put down your phone. I think this is kind of the norm of, right? Like we just like scrolling through phones, and you go to restaurants and people are out on dates just looking at their phones. And so it's no wonder why people feel incredibly lonely, right? And they go to social media to feel connected. And so I say put it down, and instead of like worrying about like what you're going to binge watch next, pick up the phone and call a friend, And I was just telling you that I had someone recently that was just put on my mind. And so I reached out to them, not very well knowing them at all. And then they just kind of like emotionally vomited on me. And I was like, well, that was probably a thing that I was supposed to make that phone call that day. So just reaching out, because how great do we feel when people reach out to us just to check in on us or send a card in the mail. Someone the other day said they got a card in the mail and it like made their day. And I think, we love getting mail. So why wouldn't we just throw a card in the mail? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think like during this time, I wrote a note to like call somebody once a day, just that I haven't talked to in a while, to catch up with, because, we are finding that you are having more time in your day, hopefully, even despite homeschooling. But, the busyness that we had in life, I know for kids, it's probably sad that a lot of things are canceled. Parents were like, oh yeah, we're not leaving every night to go to the soccer game or go to the whatever. But, building some habits right now to really once this is all over, that you're reaching out more, realizing it doesn't take very long. Once you, I'm sure initially, if you haven't talked to someone in a while, it takes a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah.
It'd be a bummer after, like, right now my family and I are taking walks every single night. We hadn't done that before this COVID thing. And it'd be a bummer for COVID to go away and we stop taking walks, right? Like it'd be all for naught. So, I mean, just keeping those things in place of like, there has been a really sweet thing about this COVID time is connecting more with your family and getting, I have played more Pokemon with my kids in the last month, right? Like,
Yeah.
we've watched fun stuff together. We introduced them to the Brady Bunch. I mean, like, it's just been some fun, sweet, wholesome time. And so it'd be a bummer if when this all goes back to normal, that all that goes away with it.
Yeah, I have refused to play any more Monopoly with my kids. Jeremy has to play Monopoly with the girls because it turns extremely vicious. But we play a game that I like called the Donner Party. You'll appreciate that, where, and it is, and we have another one about the Salem witch trial. You're trying to figure out who's the witch. There's history involved, right? But
Yeah.
super fun, super fun. You and I were talking earlier. I mean, I perform best when I have habits. I'm perpetual by nature. I don't see time and space. So it's like having all of those habits ingrained. And I wake up at 5:15 every morning. I meet my neighbor. We walk for an hour, and now we're not walking, at 5:30. And it's like, that one person that I would talk to before I had to talk to everybody else in my life. And it was like a form of therapy. And now, that's kind of dropped to the side, but that doesn't mean I can't call her, right? And talk, but just, what sort of habits are you going to be forming now that are going to support you now and later? Because, I've been bleaching my teeth. I'm still eating good. Like I'm going to come out of this pandemic with better skin, teeth, routines, all that. It's like, you can't let a good pandemic go to waste, right? There's shelter in place.
Yeah.
Got to come out looking better than before.
Right. Right.
So, what other tips would you have? We're not getting.
I do have a couple questions here. So
good.
I'll remain anonymous because they're sent privately, but I will say one is I'm living in a household recently post-transplant, so we do have to be extra careful with cleaning and staying safe. Even normally it can bring out obsessive behaviors, but definitely during this time. What signs can we watch out for as obsessive anxiety disorders coming to a head? So, I mean, when we think of any of the anxiety things or obsessive, it's the belief that if I don't do these things, if I don't clean, if I don't sort, if I don't count, if I don't whatever, then bad things will happen, right? So there's a difference between me cleaning my doorknobs right now because of COVID versus if I don't do that, someone's going to die today, right? Or something bad's going to happen. And so when we kind of get obsessive about if I clean my doorknob, I'm just doing that because everyone seems to be doing those right now. And then I walk away, I can walk away from that. But if I have to go back and just like re-clean it, or I become like, I need to re-clean it 20 times a day. It's those things that are out of, they're not in moderation. They're just become intrusive. If they get in the way of my daily living routines, that's when it becomes concerning. So just look at things of, is this getting in the way of how I'm living my life? It's okay to wipe off your countertops, but if it's wiping off your countertops and then coming back in and wiping them off again, and it's becoming a habit where it's getting in, the word is like intrusive, or getting in the way of my daily living. So that's that one. And then what long-term tool can I use to prevent feelings of loss after a suicide? Man, I would say get connected with other survivors who can say me too. And there's a ton of resources, both books, both online, in person. There's a lot of helpful resources out there to let you know that you're not alone. And I think that society does a bad thing of saying like, oh, it's been a year, you should be on, you should be over it, you should move on. I have a lot of clients who it's been like 3 or 4 months since they lost their spouse, and their friends are saying you should date again. And they're like, we were married for 30 years. What do you mean I should start
Yeah.
dating, right? There's that thing of like being uncomfortable with other people's discomfort. And so we want to fix it. So go date again. That's not reality. So just being patient with yourself and recognizing that grief doesn't just end after 1 year, and it's really cyclical. Like, you know, I lost my mom when I was 10, and I remember not really thinking about it much for, you know, several years. And then after my wedding, after she missed my wedding, that was like a hard thing to be like, she missed my wedding, you know? And then she missed it when my kids came home. And so there's those life circumstances that are going to happen that are going to keep bringing back that grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, we have another question off of Facebook.
go for it.
Well, this is my soul sister, Nicole. We sometimes you get close friends because you share pain with, and she lost her brother last year, and I did as well, now 11 years ago. So she wrote, so my 7-year-old is crying more. I noticed that she is just way more emotional than ever before. She can't explain her feelings, but she's been like this ever since school closed. What are some ways that I can support her and her feelings that she can't explain?
Yeah, that's a good question. So kids thrive on routine, right? And they get really scared and anxious when things are scary, right? And so a lot of, I think she said 7-year-olds are not going to be able to articulate like what seems scary and what's going to happen. And I miss all my friends and I'm anxious about that. So just normalizing it and sitting down and trying to keep routines, but also keeping those lines of communication open. And a 7-year-old can't always articulate, you know, but you can see it, like just play with them. Just keep it as common and normal as you can. And maybe start the conversation is like, I bet you miss your friends a lot. Which friends are you missing the most? Or what about, like, is there a way that we can connect you with your friends so that you can still see them over Zoom, you know? Or would you want to write a letter to your teacher and send it? Because I would be more than happy to send that along. Just keeping things as normal as possible in spite of what's going on. Kids need like routine for sure.
Yeah. Don't you think also, I mean, one of our children, she was crying a ton. And when I asked her about it, she was afraid that Jeremy and I or my parents would die from this COVID. And you can understand why, because she sees my husband, you know, was reading on Twitter, you know, seeing stuff like 2-3 months ago. He went into prep mode in like beginning of February. And so, you know, she's had a lot more awareness of this earlier on. But I think she's, you know, when it came down to it, she's afraid that we're going to die, right? And reassuring them, well, you know, mommy and daddy are taking precautions and we're trying to be as safe as possible. And if we do get it, we're at a younger age that hopefully will, you know, come out on the other side from it. So.
Yeah, just reassuring them. Obviously, we don't know absolutes. You can't, you know, say you'll never get it, but just like we're doing, like you said, we're doing everything we can to ensure that we don't get it. We're keeping our family safe. But when kids don't have all the pieces or they don't understand all the pieces, they have to connect the dots any way they can. And sometimes when they connect the dots to finish the stories that they're kind of hearing bits and pieces of, their connections are a lot worse than the reality, right? So mom and dad fight, they're getting a divorce. Right. You know, someone, you know, they connect the dots. So connecting the dots for them would be helpful and in a language, in a level that they can understand at whatever age, you know, so it's age appropriate, but helping them connect those dots because like I said, they can't always articulate it and just helpful to fill it in for them.
And I think like, you know, as kids get older and they can read and they're overhearing the news and stuff, I mean, it's terrifying for us to have to, you know, to get informed by the news. But being careful how you communicate it and how much they're involved with it. And that is key. I think we have another question. Lily, do you see it? Because I heard a little ding on my side.
And then I have one down here too.
Oh, good.
But you can go ahead first.
No, Lily's going to send it over to me. She's
okay. So it says, when trying to further the conversation on mental health and suicide, how would you address when Christians label feelings as sin? I feel this shuts people up and doesn't embrace the person in pain or struggling. The main feeling being fear. So, man, I think a lot of people have a lot of dumb opinions, right? So, man, I get similar questions like this a lot. So for Christians, a lot of times they feel like you should just pray more. You should read your Bible more. You should do this or you should do that. There's that should word. Get that out of your
Yeah.
mind. But if you do this, then everything is fine. Okay. So, but same as like if someone had a heart disease or had, diabetes, we would say, get the medicine, get what you need to do to take care of yourself. But for some reason with mental illness, we think that that's weak. We think that like there's shame attached to that. We think that you're not a good enough Christian or whatever it is that your faith is. And so you should just be able to suck it up and pull your boots up by the bootstraps and you'll be good. But that's not reality because the brain is a vital organ, right? So why would every other organ be okay to help it, with meds or therapy or whatever, but it's not okay for the brain. And so I think that there's just a lot of ignorance, and I think you're right with fears. People get really scared, and so it's too scary to think about. So instead we just say, just fix it, get over it, move on, right? Like toughen up, and then we don't have to deal with it. But that's not reality. So I say get the help that you need and ignore those people that have that dumb comment.
Yeah. I think like in the Christian community, it's important to, talk about mental health and be open, to sharing, people's own struggles with it, because I think it has been extremely stigmatized, right?
Mm-hmm.
In society as a whole, but probably
and in
more
the church.
so. And in the church a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we eat our own sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. I have another question coming in. Christina asks, hey, Christina. So if we see someone that is starting to show symptoms of depression, when do we know it's serious enough to seek professional counsel?
Yeah, so, it's always good to just open up the dialogue with them. And if you started noticing all those signs, right, that we kind of just talked about a few minutes ago, I would say that's a great time to open up the conversation and see like, how are you doing? What's going on? I've noticed these changes. And I always think it's best to call out the exact things that you see. It's very broad to say, hey, I noticed you seem depressed. Okay. Instead of, hey, I noticed that you don't ever call back, or you don't want to hang out with us anymore, or you've been drinking a lot more, or you sleep a lot more. Just, you're agitated, call out exactly it is that you see, and have that conversation with them. And then, you got to ask, if you're kind of seeing some things that are concerning, then you got to ask like, hey, I'm wondering like, if the person says, oh, I'm down, or my wife left me, or my husband left me, or I lost my job, I always ask like, wow, just empathize. Like that feels very overwhelming. Yeah, it is. Like, have you been sleeping? No, I'm staying up all night thinking about this. I'm so stressed. And then wow, not sleeping, that takes a toll. That becomes really overwhelming. I'm wondering if you ever wish that you could just like go to sleep and not wake up. And they're like, yeah, because then I don't have to worry about this anymore. Like, yeah, I hear you. That seems overwhelming. So when you want to go to sleep and not wake up, I'm wondering if you've been having thoughts of suicide. That's like as simple as it is, right? And so they say, yeah. And what I always ask is, and people go like, oh my gosh, you would say that? And I would say that. So I always think of like suicide as a continuum. So if you go back to like our math days, and it's just like a long line, right? And someone who is thinking about suicide, right? So then I ask them like, hey, if you've thought about suicide, do you have a plan? Do you know how you would do it? And people will say, what? Now you're going to give them the idea that they have to create a plan. No, it's going back to the education thing, right? So we think of, okay, do you have a plan? Yes. Okay, what is your plan? Let's just say I would use a gun, or I have a bunch of pills I would take. Okay, so on that continuum, we've just moved from just a thought to an actually like a plan. So we're actually going further down that continuum. So it becomes a little more troublesome, right? And concerning. Okay, so if you're going to use a gun, or if you're going to use these pills, do you have the means? Do you have them accessible? Yeah, my dad's got a gun and he doesn't lock it up. Or yeah, I have all these leftover pills from, fill in the blank. Okay, so you have them accessible. So now we've moved from just thoughts to a plan to the means to act it out, right? So we're getting further and further down this continuum, which is more and more concerning. Okay, so when's the last time you thought about this? Oh, it was like 2 years ago. Okay, well, I'm still concerned, but I'm not as concerned as this morning, every day of my life. Okay, so now if we have a thought, we have a plan, we have the means to do it, and I think about it daily, do you see how we're like moving down this continuum and it's actually getting more and more at risk? So that's a long-winded answer to answer your friend, but if you notice something, your gut is there for a reason, and so act on it. And a lot of people say, I'll just ask them next time I see them. Well, you might not see them next time. It might be a month before you see them, and they might be gone before then. So I would just ask. If something's concerning, ask.
So what do you do, Brandy, as far as like, you've mentioned it to them, you've said you should seek counseling or whatever, and they're like, no, then what would your next thing be?
Yeah, so that's a common question. So when you're in a place where it's dark and it's overwhelming and it's depressing, that phone weighs like 500 pounds. They don't even care enough to pick up the phone to call for help. So you have to do that for them. So you could call and make an appointment, or you can go with them. One thing that I've done with folks a lot of times is I call the national like suicide prevention hotline, right? And I just put it on speaker. And that does two things. Is one is I can get this person, I can just say to the person who answers the phone, hey, I'm here with Bill, and I'm concerned. He's saying some things about wanting to hurt himself, or he's not, whatever, fill in the blank. And I'm concerned. I'm wondering if you could talk to us together, right? And so he or she could start talking to Bill, and we can get this conversation. This person can kind of help talk them down because they're trained in this. This is what they do. They answer the phone 24/7, right? But the other thing is that if I'm not with Bill the next time that he's feeling this way, I just introduced him to a very safe resource that he could say, oh, it wasn't that bad. I can call again on my own, right? Sometimes we get so scared of like, well, if I call, are they going to track me? Are they going to come to my home? Are they going to call and tell my, whomever? It's strictly anonymous, but you just open the door and introduce them to a resource that they can then use on their own, as well as in that moment, you can get them the help that they need.
Mm-hmm. At what point do you call the police and do a welfare check or something, someone that you haven't, that you're concerned about not responding back to you?
Yeah. So, if you haven't heard from them in a couple, if they're doing things that are atypical, that's the kind of things that I get worried about, is when he always calls me, but now he hasn't called me in a couple of days. Then, you want to start making some phone calls to people who might have seen them, or you could do a lot of welfare checks, and just, can you drive by? Can you check on this person? I just think trust your gut. More times than not, people know when something's not right. And so many families that I talk to that I knew that day I shouldn't, like they just know. And so trust your gut, check in on them, make sure that, you're doing everything you can in your power to help them out. And also recognizing that it's not your fault if something happens, right?
Yeah. Okay. It looks like we have another question. Brandy, do you see it? Or,
So the one, say a friend, maybe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So say a friend is showing the symptoms like no one needs me around, but is always dismissive and jokes it off when I try to ask about it. Is that a time to contact other family and friends or go to the cops? So one thing that I get that question a lot for parents or teachers who say, my kid always says, oh, I'm just going to kill myself. Oh, I'm just going to kill myself.
Yeah.
And I always say, then every time they say that, then I would ask them about that. Like, are you thinking about suicide? I'm like, no, I'm just joking. I'm not doing anything. Then that's a good way to say, like, I'm going to ask you every time. So maybe you start changing your language of how to talk about it. Or just know that I'm going to ask about it. If someone is dismissive and jokes it off, I would still be concerned about that, because for example, don't ever joke about killing myself, right? Because I don't find the humor in it. But I know that some people do. So I would go back to trusting your gut. If something feels awry, or you could just have a conversation with them saying, you know what, you joke about this a lot and you dismiss it, but I want you to know that I'm really concerned every time you say that. So how do I make sure that you're safe and taken care of without you feeling like I'm hounding you all the time? Like, how can I help you? But right now I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable when you're making those jokes, kind of just label it and see how that response is, and see where you can go from there.
Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the media portrays suicide, because I know we've talked about this a lot. and your feelings on it.
Yeah. So media, it goes back to the same thing with the COVID. They make money off of like sensationalizing things, right? So what happens when a suicide happens from a celebrity is that they get really descriptive, and they tell all the details of how they did it and why they did it and who saw them and who found them, and all these like gory, morbid details, which are not necessary. So you could just say, so-and-so died by suicide. We're saddened to hear this news. You don't need to give any details because it's not conducive to anything, right? And then there's websites on how to safely report about suicides. So-and-so took their life. If you're in trouble, or if you know someone that does, call the National Suicide Hotline, right? Just give them the resources so that we know that after Robin Williams took his life, there was a 10% increase in suicides immediately following Robin Williams. And that's because it was just reported on nonstop, and how he did it and who did it and where it found it. And, like all that is not necessary. It's just really morbid details for the rest of the world to kind of, consume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions. Lily, do you have anything on your side over there on Facebook? Did you tell them what you do for a living now? Well, first of all, let me say that this is the sad part about having girlfriends that are amazing and passionate about what they do, is that they eventually will get amazing opportunities to affect the lives and they move away. So it's all about you moving away from me.
Yes, moving away from you. So I do work with survivors. Not 100% of my day is for survivors, and so we respond to families right after they have a loved one die by suicide, and we provide resources and literature on how to talk to kids, because there's definite things you kind of need to be aware of when talking to kids about a suicide loss. And we provide therapy, and we just kind of wrap our arms around. I always say it's like the resources that I would have loved as a kid is what I'm able to provide now. And so it's really like a full circle, it's a blessing for me to be able to provide fellow survivors with what I didn't have.
And do most counties have those tools?
No, there's only like 37, I think, in the US, but California has 3. I think we're working on our 4th one right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then an author. Yeah, that's kind of what I do.
Yeah. Well, you also have a blog, which I love your videos off of it. And you had lots of other people share on their blog the experience called The Gift of Second. So tell me a little bit about the book that you wrote. I have unfortunately and fortunately purchased it for friends that have experienced this and mailed it off. So
yeah. So The Gift of Second.
You have a picture of it?
Yeah, I do. Let me go to this real fast. So The Gift of Second, Healing from the Impact of Suicide. This was the book that I wish that I would have had, after my mom's suicide. It's really short. It's like 93 pages. I was advised by another survivor, like, don't make anything over 100 because in grief you can't read anything, anything thick, So this was a book that I just wrote that felt like what would have been helpful, So there's a bunch of other advice from and wisdom from other survivors, but it talks about everything from like guilt and shame and trauma and how to get support that's unique to suicide loss, and how to talk about it. There's a lot of shame and embarrassment that folks, a lot of times people don't want to tell people it's a suicide, so they don't. And then we kind of just talk about what happens if you don't, because sometimes that backfires. So just kind of a lot of support that I think would be helpful to survivors.
Yeah, and when people don't talk about it, it creates this shame, and then other people can't be that Me Too factor that says, oh, that happened in my family too, and the person was amazing, and we love them, and we miss them, and we wish they were here. With all that, we do have another question that popped up. It says, what types of mental health professionals are there out there, and what is the difference between them all? How do you know what type of health professional to pick?
That's a good question. So a psychiatrist can prescribe medicine. So your antidepressants, your anti-anxiety, like all those kinds of things. Those are psychiatrists because they're a doctor for the brain, basically. A psychologist a psychologist can do talk therapy. A lot of times they do assessments, but they have their doctorate in psychology. And so you can go to a psychologist or a therapist or a social worker. They could all do therapy with you. You can go to a doctor and also get meds prescribed, but I always suggest going to like a psychiatrist if you can, because that's their specialty, right? So it's just, I think it's better, but a lot of people find a lot of success with doctors prescribing, antidepressants and there's a lot of, I would say there's a lot of hesitancy for a lot of people to go on antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds because they feel like I don't want to know it. I want to feel it. I don't want to have something else control me. I want to, all these things. And I get that. I hear it all the time. And sometimes we just need a little help. It doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to be, for the rest of your life. It could just be for a season. But a lot of times I can see a distinct change in clients where they're like, I'm not crying all the time. I'm actually finding I'm getting sleep. I'm not a puddle every day. And then I'll say, hey, didn't you just start meds a few weeks ago? And they're like, oh, I wonder if this is what's impacting me, And so it doesn't take it all away, but it helps you kind of just sort through where it's not so heavy. And maybe after a season, you don't have to use them again. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stigma, but so many people in America, use antidepressants and medication.
Yeah. And if you get on one that's not a good fit and you notice like, oh, I have all these side effects that I don't like, then tell your doctor and they'll switch you to another one. So it's not like, one was a bad experience. They're all like that, So you're your best advocate. So if something doesn't feel right and you don't like it, then talk to your doctor about that and get something that's different. But the best possible concoction is if you're in need of meds, to also do talk therapy at the same time. So it helps sort through it while you're also kind of getting some stabilization.
Yeah, good. Do you have any other questions on your end?
I don't. I think I pounded them all out. Oh, thanks, Shelley. Oh, that was private, so I'm not going to read it. Okay. Sorry, but thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Good. Well, I want to thank you for leaving your 3 boys and your husband to meet with us and bless us for the hour. You can go on Facebook and we can like your Gift of Second Facebook page, right? Have one? Yeah, and follow her blog. I've learned a lot, even if you're in a great mental space. I mean, knowing all the warning signs, just being friends with Brandy has kind of changed my awareness for helping to support other people that are dealing with that. And so thank you so much for your time. Definitely order that book if you're a survivor of loss. And, people often don't know what to say when people have somebody that takes their life, but you can send them a card and a copy of the book. And when they're ready to read it, it's a great resource. So,
yeah.
All right. Anything more from you, Brandy?
No, I do get that question just off that a lot. Like, when should I send them a book? Or, it doesn't have to be my book. Just when should I send them a book, right? I think I'll wait till they're ready. My advice, my unsolicited advice, is to just send it because you don't know when they're ready, right? But I hear all the time like, oh, your book is sitting on my nightstand. It's been sitting there for 6 months and tonight's the first night that I opened it, right? So just send it and just say, I don't have the right words, but hopefully this can help, and I'm here for you. So
good. All right. Well, thank you guys for attending, and have a lovely evening. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks, Peggy.
Thanks.